Now, from CBS 4 News, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Good morning, I'm Jim DeFede, and welcome to Facing South Florida. We are coming to you live this morning to take a closer look at the March for Our Lives rallies held yesterday. They were impressive events, spearheaded by students, supported by students, all determined to end gun violence in their schools and communities. Hundreds of thousands of young people gathered across the country and even around the world demanding their leaders address gun violence. And there were more than 800 marches and rallies, the largest in Washington. We'll have a live report from D.C. in just a moment. But first, I want to focus on the march in Parkland. That was both inspiring and emotional, as it featured an array of students from the school, including one who was shot last month, as well as the father of 14-year-old Alex Schachter. Here are some of the more powerful moments that stood out to me.
I was taking notes in my psychology classroom when the horrid sound of gunshots echoed the walls of the 1200 building. My name is Samantha Mayer, and on the 14th of February, I was shot in the knee in my 4th period classroom. My classmates and I laid helplessly on the floor, hearing and feeling rapid gunfire.
Since the day that changed my life, I have decided that I will not stop fighting for change. I can stand here today and tell you all that the 17 victims' families will not stop fighting until we make this world a better and safer place.
This past month, we have mourned the loss of life. We have also mourned the loss of innocence, the loss of security, and, quite frankly, the loss of humanity.
Those 17 people did not die in vain. They, along with the entire student body of Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, and all of you standing before me today, are the force and spirit that drive this movement. And we will stop at nothing until we make real, lasting change.
So what does it all mean? Well, here are my 3 takeaways. First, the students were smart to keep the focus on the need to vote. The NRA's power doesn't come from money it raises. What makes the NRA powerful is that their members are willing to decide who to vote for solely on the issue of guns. Until the folks demanding common sense gun regulations show they can excite voters on their side of the issue, politicians can ignore them. Second, don't doubt the resolve of young people. We've seen it through history. Yesterday in Washington, Jennifer Hudson sang "The Times They Are A-Changin'." Bob Dylan wrote that song when he was 23, and it became the anthem for the anti-war movement. Martin Luther King Jr.'s daughter spoke at the rally, but folks often forget Martin Luther King led the Birmingham bus boycott when he was just 25. And Malala taped a message for the rallies. Malala was 15 when she was shot in Pakistan and came back to lead a movement on the right of girls to go to school. She ended up winning the Nobel Peace Prize. Don't doubt young people. And my final takeaway was how powerful and how important it was for this movement, which started in an affluent, largely white suburb of Broward County, to connect with those who have suffered from gun violence in the inner city. Here is Stoneman Douglas student Jacqueline Corin speaking in Washington.
We openly recognize that we are privileged individuals and would not have received as much attention if we weren't for the affluence of our city. Because of that, however, we share the stage today and forever with those who have always stared down the barrel of a gun.
To make the point further, there was Zion Kelly from Washington, D.C., whose twin brother was killed walking home from school.
I'm here to represent the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of students who live every day in constant paranoia and fear on their way to and from school.
And there was Trayvon Bosley from Chicago, whose brother was also fatally shot.
I'm here to speak for those Chicago youth who feel their voices have been silenced for far too long. And I'm here to speak on behalf of everyone that believes a child getting shot and killed in Chicago or any other city is still a not acceptable norm.
But the person who got to me was 11-year-old Naomi Wadler from Alexandria, Virginia.
I am here today to represent Cortland Arrington. I am here today to represent Hadia Pendleton. I am here today to represent Tiana Thompson, who at just 16 was shot dead in her home here in Washington, D.C. I am here today to acknowledge and represent the African American girls whose stories don't make the front page of every national newspaper. Whose stories don't lead on the evening news. I represent the African American women who are victims of gun violence, who are simply statistics instead of vibrant, beautiful girls that full of potential.
She's 11 years old. Okay, let's go now to Washington, where my colleague Lauren Pastrana was at the rally yesterday. Lauren, give us a sense of what it was like on the ground there Saturday.
Jim, if I had to pick one word to describe the feeling of what it was like here in Washington, D.C. yesterday, I keep coming back to the word intense. All of the emotions simply felt heightened, whether it was happiness because, yes, people were smiling, there was cheering and chanting, or sadness and anger because there was a lot of yelling. There were also quite a bit of crying here yesterday. It was very intense for all the people who decided to come and share their passion with the world and to support the students from Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School here in Washington, D.C. yesterday. And I kept going back to the fact the shooting at Stoneman Douglas only happened 5.5 weeks ago, so it was very impressive just to see what these kids really, along with the help of a lot of adults, no doubt, but what these kids have been able to accomplish in the last month. They did a good job, I think, of staying on message. They kind of put their points out there, what they were looking for. But Jim, as you mentioned, they also really focused on the fact that people need to get out there and vote. They say they too are going to become single issue voters now because they're only going to support candidates who are for common sense gun legislation. They have realized now that their power is at the polls, Jim.
And Lauren, I thought it was critical the way they connected, as I just said a moment ago, with not just their shooting, but with shootings that take place every single day in the inner city. What was your impressions on that?
I think it surprised people that they did bring out students from other cities because that speaker list was kept really close to the vest until very shortly before the actual program began. But when students from Washington, D.C., Chicago, the south side of L.A. came out on that stage and shared their stories and shared their truth about the gun violence that they dealt with, those are some of the most emotional moments for the crowd that I saw, some of the loudest cheers, because I think the people in the crowd really saw themselves in a lot of those people. Perhaps some of the people in the crowd can't relate to those students from Parkland who admitted say their neighborhood in Broward County is not sort of a haven for gun violence, but kids like those in Chicago deal with this day in and day out. You mentioned Jennifer Hudson. She lost loved ones to gun violence in Chicago. Her mother, brother, and nephew all killed in the city of Chicago. You also talked about Yolanda King. That was one of the biggest surprises. I had no idea, even with the speaker list, that she was going to be coming out there yesterday, and she really channeled her inner Dr. King when she spoke yesterday.
Well, Lauren, you mentioned that point. We've got that sound. Let's play that now. This is Yolanda Renee King coming out on stage.
My grandfather had a dream that his 4 little children will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream that enough is enough.
Just an incredible moment. Again, 9 years old. She's just 9 years old giving that speech. But again, probably one of the most familiar faces from this movement is Emma Gonzalez. You and I talked earlier today about Emma Gonzalez and the impact that she's had. And when she came out and talked about the silence, you know, tried to convey this sense. We've got some sound from her coming out on stage. And then on the back end, I want to talk to you about it. Let's play that sound now.
Since the time that I came out here, it has been 6 minutes and 20 seconds. The shooter has ceased shooting and will soon abandon his rifle, blend in with the students as they escape, and walk free for an hour before arrest. Fight for your lives before it's someone else's job.
Lauren, you could hear the emotion in her voice.
Jim, not only could you hear the emotion in her voice, you could also hear her breathing when she was silent. You could hear her sniffling from the cold, and the crowd was silent along with her. At some points, they started chanting her name, but then they got quiet again. It was such a stark contrast to what we saw from her in the days immediately following the shooting, where she was chanting, "We call BS." That sort of became her rallying cry. She didn't revert to that rally cry yesterday. No, she decided to go for silence. She posted on Twitter late last night that while a lot of people thought that the silence actually lasted 6 minutes, she said, No, but imagine if it did. Imagine if you had to be in a classroom silent for longer than 6 minutes, not knowing if a gunman would enter your classroom. Very powerful stuff indeed from Emma Gonzalez.
Lauren, it just was an amazing day, an historic day, and, you know, safe travels back. Thank you for joining us. All right. Now, so let's bring in my guest. Adam Buchwald is a student at Marjory Stoneman Douglas and was one of the speakers at the rally in Parkland. Adam, thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
So you're 16 years old, correct?
I am 16 years old.
And you spoke, I watched your speech yesterday from Parkland. We'll get into some of the specifics of the movement that you're trying to help create, but 5 weeks have passed, and now you see these rallies around the world and the event that you had in Parkland. Give us your perspective. Could you imagine all this taking place in such a short period of time?
It's just been crazy. The turnout has been unbelievable. Just about 4 weeks ago, we were marching on Tallahassee, and look where we are now. We have over 800 marches around the country. The march in Parkland was just so powerful because the students on that stage were getting their message across about gun safety, gun reform, and just about how we want to make a major change. Again, as I said in my speech, I said the finish line for the Parkland March and every single march around the country is just our beginning. We're committed to make change, and we're going to strive for that.
I know that you have this weird fluke of history in that you were in middle school in Connecticut when Sandy Hook occurred. Your school was just 20 minutes or so away from Sandy Hook. You were on lockdown during that time. This event happens. That must have been surreal almost to go through two of these.
It's so unreal. I mean, I was in middle school. I was a 7th grader at Weston Middle School in Weston, Connecticut during the time of Sandy Hook. Weston, Connecticut is just about 20 minutes away from Newtown. And I remember I was in middle school. My school was on lockdown, and the school took all the precautions that it needed to make sure that the students were safe. It's unreal.
And nothing happened after Sandy Hook, but something's happening now. And I want to talk to you about that when we take this break and talk about the efforts that you're personally leading. We'll do more of that with Adam when we come back.